Hello, 8-Boat, and half a day from HT3G-Man. Hey, I want to send along a little video today with Danny. I heard he was putting together a picture montage video of the 8-Boat, and I wanted to share with him some of the things that that are memorable to me from the 8-Boat, and I don't really know how to get started, so I'm just going to start off with about how I got there. I arrived to Guam, a farm boy from the Eastern Shore, and I wound up on this tropical paradise on a Sunday afternoon, or a Saturday I think it was, and they dropped me off, and the first thing I remembered is when I got off of the plane was it was really hot and it was really humid, and I wasn't really quite prepared for all that. So I got off the plane, and I had no idea on how to get to my duty station. It was the first duty station I had been sent to, and when I got there, I called down to the, I guess it was the duty desk, and they were going to send a truck for me, but I never saw a truck, and I wound up walking from one end of the island to the other on my thumb and on a bus, and I finally wound up at Naval Station Guam, where I was placed in a temporary duty barracks for a couple days, and before I got assigned to Barracks 13. I was kind of lucky because some of my friends had gone before me. Bob Aiken had gone ahead, and we had gone to A school together, so some of the people kind of knew me, or at least I had a friend there. When I got there, though, I found out that it was a whole nother ball game, man. These guys were well established. They were friends, and there were some things going on in the barracks at the time, and when I showed up, nobody really knew who or what I was. But it didn't take long before I fell right in, and the next thing you know, I'm part of the PF Flyers, if you will. Now let's talk a little bit about the PF Flyers. PF Flyers was an organization of young men serving in the Navy on the 8-Boat, and we had a couple things in mind. One was partying pretty hard, and the other one was carrying on. We'll just leave it like that. So we would have some really good times, and with those guys, man, I really made a tight brotherhood. Matter of fact, I am still tight with some of them today. Some of my favorite memories, though, would be Saturday afternoon when Joe Rios and I would take off in the Volkswagen and maybe go downtown, or maybe whenever all the guys got together and we would go around the island, and that brings to mind a little story. We had gone over to Special Services, and we were going to go take a ride around the island. So we went over there, and I remember Joe and McGee and myself, and I think Gallagher, all four of us go over to Special Services to rent a Volkswagen thing, and we were going to all pile into this Volkswagen and make a big, awesome island hop tour around the island. Well, when we got over there, we had been, let's say, carrying on and partying a little bit. And when we showed up, the little girl there that we had made the arrangements with, she wouldn't let us have the car because we were all a little bit intoxicated, and we all kept trying to get her to go with us. So they wouldn't loan us the car that day, and I remember that being a big event. Some other favorite things were going to Fiesta. You know, like there was never any shortage of Fiesta because we worked with a lot of yard birds, and naturally when they had a Fiesta, we were friends, and they would invite us to their Fiesta. And that was a great time. I remember cooking pig over tanga wood, and eggplant and bacons and just all sorts of things. Kelaguen, red rice, all that was just new to me, and I was just eating it up. I couldn't believe I was so fortunate to be able to live in a place and interact with these people, because you understand where I came from, it was mostly just all the same. Eastern Shore white people and you know, our black community, and that's really all the experience that I had like that until I moved over to these islands, and I come running across Filipino and Chamorro and Chinese and a whole bunch of Asians, and it was incredible. It was a whole nother experience for me, and the food was entirely different. I can't remember eating some of the things I ate, raw chicken, raw beef, and loving it. It was great. Some of the things, two of the things that really stick out in my mind were surviving Typhoon Pamela, which I had never experienced anything at all like that. I mean, I lived on the East Coast and I was used to hurricanes, and we'd had a couple bad hurricanes, but nothing at all prepared me for the devastation of a tropical typhoon that slammed into the island. I remember seeing ocean-going tugboats 2 and 3 miles away from the water's edge up on the beach, tankers that had got jammed up and things of that nature. I remember a big ocean liner that got hung up out there on a roadie point, and they were cutting that apart.
40 years ago, on May 14, 1976, weather watchers spotted a disturbance north of the island of Chuuk, just east of Guam. 2 days later, the tropical depression grew into Typhoon Pamela, one of the most intense typhoons to hit Guam in the 20th century. On May 21, 1976, Typhoon Pamela slowly crept over the island of Guam. Maximum sustained winds were reportedly as high as 160 miles per hour. Typhoon-force winds beared down on the island, and within 24 hours, the typhoon produced nearly 34 inches of rainfall. There was 1 death reported in Guam. The low death count was attributed to the warning system put in place by the civilian and military administrations, who were able to move assets, shelter people, or allowed them to prepare for the onslaught brought on by destructive winds. In its wake, Pamela razed most of the island's buildings, damaging both civilian and military properties, leaving the island without water or power and causing an estimated $500 million worth of damage, which translates into $2 billion today.
Another thing that I really remember was the evacuation of Vietnam in April '75. Everybody thought the war was over, and it was far from over. I still remember seeing trucks with bombs and planes flying every day and things of that nature. But when Vietnam fell, it gave me a big insight into life, I guess. And I'm going to tell you, it's probably one of the most influential things that have happened to me in a long, long time. I know we talk about refugees today and vetting and people coming into our country, but I took part in probably one of the largest evacuation of refugees in America at the time. And I don't mind telling you, man, it was incredible. All these people coming in on ships on the Trans-Colorado, and toilets being built over the sides, and mothers coming off of the boat and just handing us their babies because they had no idea what was going to happen. It was kind of crazy. And then out at a roadie point where we put up all the tents, and we worked really hard. And I'm going to say this too, man, the PF Flyers, we were a handful, no doubt, and we probably weren't the best import sailors ever around, but when it came time to pull forth, man, we sure did pull forth there. And we helped a lot of people, and a lot of people helped us too. And some stories went on with that. I still remember the day I was on the dry dock, and the Tao Tung 1, I think it was Tao Tung, pulled in to Guam in Apra Harbor there. It was the LST 500, and 4 or 5 of us were sent over there to secure the ship, if you will. And I remember that these Vietnamese, South Vietnamese sailors, Navy sailors, just got up from the table, and there was stuff everywhere. There was food and knives and guns and hand grenades and lights and everything. Of course, we were stealing all that, but we got caught, so we didn't get any of it home. But I remember that and not really realizing what was going to happen. The next thing I know, we're working 24/7, and we've got more refugees than I've ever seen in my life living not 2 miles from my barracks. Kind of intimidating.
In April 1975, North Vietnamese forces waged final attacks on the capital of South Vietnam. The fall of Saigon marked the end of the controversial war, and it was the beginning of the country's reunification as a socialist republic. As communist forces advanced on Saigon, thousands of people became refugees fleeing their homeland. Operation New Life was a humanitarian effort that coincided with Operation Baby Lift. The joint military and civilian effort evacuated more than 100,000 people from Vietnam. Southeast Asian refugees were transported by sea and air to their first stop in Guam for processing and emergency medical care before heading to new homes elsewhere. On Guam, there were more than a dozen camps set up throughout the island. The largest was called Tent City in Aroti Point aboard Naval Base Guam. The second biggest was Tin City at Andersen Air Force Base in Jigo. In May, the island received its 100,000th refugee. At the peak of the humanitarian efforts, Guam housed more than 50,000 refugees, more than half the island's population at the time.
I was there when we had the earthquake. We had an earthquake on Guam. It was a Saturday. I was down at ASAM blasting. I remember this huge rock hanging over the roadway. And when the earthquake came, it's like the earth just kind of like rolled like somebody flipping a carpet, and you could sound like a train going through. I didn't really realize what was going on at the time, but that's what was happening. I made some really good friends, man. I really did. Kogan, you know, I know you're up in Alaska now. Amsdale, I hope you're still kicking it. Dominguez, like a snake. Scott Marks, you know, Joe Rios, Lauren McCall, Heffelfinger, Peterson. All of us were just growing crazy, you know what I mean? McNew was winning the Governor's Cup in some kind of a car race he had put together, and some of us were going sailing, and some were learning how to scuba dive, and we were all learning how to party and be men. I'm going to tell you right now, we were carrying on something terrible. It was so much fun. I never forget the brotherhood that I made with those people. All that came to an end, though, for me on July the 4th, 1976. I was living up in Mauricio at the time, and or previous to that, and we had worked with the village on putting together a little hukalau, and down at Petey Village, they had a festival going on, and the boys, we'd all chipped in with the Yardbird friends to have a big 4th of July, and I got orders to leave on the 4th of July, so I packed up and rode up to the Air Force Base, losing my orders along the way somewhere, as is so typical with me. And finally got on a plane and wound up in Hawaii, where I went to Ford Island. So on July the 4th, I wake up and go downtown to the Crater Festival. I had no idea. New man, new town, new city, no idea where anything was. So that was the Navy. That was the Navy for me. Guam, the PF Flyers, AFDM 8, the 8 boat. Going down to Mylena's, going down to Cafe de Paris for Magoo's birthday, or any birthday for that matter. Going to eat at the little Chinese restaurant down the way there. Riding around the island, swimming at Inarajan, Talafofo. Going to the freshwater caves, you know, where we get those prawns. Just different things. I remember lots of coconuts and mangoes and guavas and papayas, and thinking to myself, this is like what you read about, you know. This is like going snorkeling out on the reefs. I can remember snorkeling for hours over top of the reefs, and you would start off at one spot, and the next thing you know, you'd find yourself 3 or 4 miles down the beach, or out a little bit closer towards the ocean. I remember building a boat with a dive locker with Dive Dan, building a boat, and then somehow or another we stole a motor, got a motor or something, and we wound up taking that in and out of the harbor quite a bit. That was fun for a while. I think we did some water skiing there and took it out in the ocean a few times before that wore off. I remember Port Forward. Hey, Port Forward, muster, Port Forward. I remember that really well. A lot of good times there. So, Anyhow, Danny, that's pick and choose out of this video what you want, what worked for you. Remember Gonzalez, remember Dominguez, remember Camacho and Hurley and all the boys, and that big guy that drove the yard cranes, and all the good times we had. All those good submarines, Muller's Park, port starboard watches. Who can forget Muller's Park? Named after a guy that got killed on the dock. We put this park together, and when submarines would come in, we'd have a big hookah there. We'd have beers and sandwiches and stuff, and those guys would just have the grandest time there, and I remember having a pretty good time with that. Who can forget Oser, old ships in reserve? We'll just leave it at that, okay? But I remember that whoever had the duty out there had everybody with them for the most part, because if it was a Friday or Saturday, we'd be out at Oser doing something, whatever it was. Warlord, good times. Giamatti, good times. Buzz, Foscue, Aiken, all you guys, man, I had a good time with all of you. So until I see you guys again, you know, Lauren, I see you quite often on the Facebook there, you know, so I know I keep up with you, and some of us are missing, so let's kind of keep that up. Until next time, YouTube, half a day from HT3G Man, and hey, check out Hanging with Heavy on YouTube. that's my YouTube channel. So until next time, my flyer friends, half a day.